Time now for the France 24 debate. A victory or a defeat for democracy? Britain's highest court has ruled that the UK government must go to Parliament for approval before triggering Brexit. The ruling points to both Westminster's sovereignty and to current laws that bind London to the European Union. The reason the case went to the Supreme Court in the first place was that the question that back in June was put up for referendum was considered too short and vague by the judges. What should be in the mandate to negotiate with the other 27? The opposition Labour Party wants to impose that the UK remains in the EU's common market. So should Parliament water down Theresa May's brief? The PM, who just last week called for a deal that allows London to, for instance, shut the border to EU immigrants. The British Prime Minister did score one victory this Tuesday, though. The court ruling she will not have to ask the devolved parliaments of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales before triggering those negotiations. Is that a fair decision? And where do the upcoming battles in the Commons and in the Lords leave her as she gets set to jet off to Washington this Friday? Well, she'll be seeking support from a very new administration and a new Congress. Today in the France 24 debate, next stop, Westminster. With us from Brussels, British Conservative member of the European Parliament, Charles Tannock. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Here in the studio we're with Evan O'Connell, Vice Chair of Labour in Paris, also a consultant for Aspect Consulting.
Hi.
Welcome back. From London, Andre Walker, columnist for the New York Observer. Thank you for being with us.
Hello.
And from Aberdeen, former Scottish National Party Member of Parliament, Christian Allard. Nice to see you.
Bonsoir.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. It'll be a matter of days, says Theresa May's minister in charge of Brexit. Theresa May telling the Commons that in the wake of that Supreme Court ruling, he now wants to go fast with a bill that asks the Commons and the Lords to start the clock on negotiations, thus keeping the government's timetable on track. Mariam Sahab explains.
Today, by a majority of 8-3, the Supreme Court rules that the government cannot trigger Article 50 without an Act of Parliament authorising it to do so.
Until then, Theresa May has her hands tied. The judgment blocks the government's proposed use of its prerogative powers to withdraw by serving a notice that would pull the UK from EU treaties. The proposed timeline to leave the bloc by the end of March is now beset by roadblocks. With the High Court ruling upheld, the Prime Minister must secure Parliament's seal of approval before beginning the 2 years of negotiation. The government says while it's disappointed with the judgment, it's determined to stay on course.
We will, within days, introduce legislation to give the government the legal power to trigger Article 50 and begin the formal process of withdrawal. This will be the most straightforward bill possible to give effect to the decision of the people and respect the Supreme Court's judgment.
Opponents remain steadfast, arguing that it's not politics at play, but rather a matter of upholding the sovereignty of Parliament.
There is no doubt that Brexit is the most divisive issue of a generation. But this case was about the legal process, not politics.
On the issue of devolution, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland don't need to be consulted before Brexit is triggered, a judgment described as damning by Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. The Scottish National Party said it would put forward 50 serious and substantive amendments to the government's parliamentary bill for triggering Article 50.
Charles Tannock, do you approve this decision?
Well, of course I do, because Britain is a parliamentary democracy. We're not a Tudor monarchy. Crown prerogative must have its limitations, and the Brexiteers throughout the campaign talked about regaining and getting back control to the British Parliament, the elected Parliament. So I think it's absolutely as I expected. I was surprised the British government appealed the original decision. It won't make any difference, because I suspect that both the House of Commons and the House of Lords will pass the Act. But I think that due process needs to be observed and the British Parliament needs to be involved. I mean, it's ridiculous that MEPs, we will have a vote on the final deal at the end of the say, and there was some dispute whether or not MPs would have a vote. So that really wouldn't make any sense. So I welcome the decision. We don't have a written constitution. It's up to our Supreme Court to decide what the limits of the powers of the British government are, and I think they've made a wise decision by 8-3, and I think the government should observe that, introduce a bill, and do what they have to do to respect the will of the electorate.
Roger Walker, you agree?
Well, look, the purpose of this litigation was in order to damage Brexit, to make it harder, to make it more difficult, to make it more damaging. What Charles Tannock, incidentally, who's a great man and a great representative of this country, but he's dead wrong on our role in the European Union. What he hasn't told you is that this Parliament, the House of Commons, is filled with people elected by Brexiteers from Northern England who oppose Brexit. The House of Lords is, I mean, I can only describe it as a nest of pro-European sin, a nest of evil, a dangerous place that opposes the will of the people. The truth of the matter is, when these people talk about democracy, what they really mean is removing the democratic will of the people expressed through the referendum and instead stymieing Brexit in Parliament. Now, if this Parliament was different, if it was filled with people who agreed with their own voters, who agreed with the British people, then perhaps Theresa May shouldn't have contested this case. But the reason she contests this case is she knows full well that when they talk about being given a vote on the deal, when they talk about being consulted, when they talk about all those things, what they really mean is they want to stymie Brexit and they want to go against the will of the British people expressed in the referendum. That's the truth of the matter.
Evan O'Connell.
Yeah, it's funny that the representative of a paper owned by Jared Kushner and the Kushner family, who is Donald Trump's son-in-law and now a senior advisor to Donald Trump. So a team that lost the popular vote in a recent election.
Let's stick to this topic here.
Sure. But it's funny that this man is lecturing an elected representative on democracy when no one, I believe, has ever elected him to anything.
Well, allow me to answer that. I worked for Breitbart, extremely proud to have worked for Steve Bannon, and extremely proud now to have worked for the New York Observer, which is run by Jared Kushner. The truth of the matter is, the European Union wanted a punitive deal on the United Kingdom over Brexit. They can't do that as long as the White House, with Donald Trump, wants a free trade deal with the UK. You saw it in Theresa May's speech recently. There was almost a spring in her step when she knows that the EU cannot push round the United Kingdom as long as the White House is solidly supportive of Brexit.
All right, we'll talk about the White House later, but let's get back to the matter at hand. And Andre Walker, you're saying you're against Westminster having the final say, but that's been the case in your country since the 17th century.
Well, look, I don't have a problem with parliamentary democracy. I certainly don't have a problem with parliamentary sovereignty. That's why I voted leave. My problem is with this Parliament. Always remember, there's going to be an election.
So you're saying there should be a snap election?
Well, certainly, if what we think is going to happen...
Let's have an election. Good idea.
Yeah, so if Labour MPs are actually going to vote against their own people and oppose Article 50, then yes, there should be an election. Theresa May has made clear nobody is a bigger supporter than me of the House of Lords. I think it's a great British tradition and I think it's a great revising chamber. But if the House of Lords seriously is going to vote against this referendum, then Theresa May is right to abolish them. The problem is not Parliament. The problem is this Parliament.
All right, Christian Allard, let me get Christian Allard in on this. Christian Allard,
can I make a comment?
Christian Allard first, and then we'll go back to you, Charles Tannock.
Yes, I think somebody's not very happy. I don't know why. They were a referendum, and I think that person won that referendum. So I dare to think if they had lost the referendum, what kind of language they will use. But yes, of course, I do welcome the decision by the court today. But it should have never gone to to the Supreme Court. He should have never gone to the High Court either. I think the UK government should have recognised straight ahead that it was we live in a parliamentary democracy, so of course Parliament has to decide. Now, what's going to happen next, we're not so sure, because parliamentary democracy is as good as its parliament and as good as its government as its opposition. Now, if the opposition, like we heard today, is going to just rubber stamp what Theresa May is putting forward, then our parliamentary democracy maybe doesn't work the way it should work. So I will hope that the debate is going to be a very strong debate, and that the outcome, triggering Article 50 or not, is not a done deal, but is something that the opposition and the SNP, the Scottish National Party, with the third party in opposition, the second party in opposition, the third party in the chamber, will make sure that we will oppose Theresa May the way she wants to go for a hard Brexit, which hasn't got the backing of the majority of people in the UK, and definitely not in Scotland.
All right, that's a criticism leveled against the Labour Party by Christian Laure, because Labour has come out and said that they won't be the ones to block the triggering of Article 50 by the end of March, as the government wants it to. Why not? If you're an opposition party, why not take a hard stance like the SNP is taking?
Labour will work to amend this bill via amendment, but Labour will not block. And I think that is a position that most people in the Labour Party agree with. I know there are some rebels. Most people in the Labour Party believe that Labour should not block the final bill as it is.
No matter what it is.
The British people voted for Brexit. I would be personally. I would personally be for, and this is not Labour policy, but it's certainly my approach. I would personally be for new snap elections before Article 50 is triggered. I think that actually that is the only way to really have the British people's say on what Brexit should look like. And I would personally love to see Labour and the Tories face off and offer competing visions of what Brexit would look like to the British people. We're not going to see that. And so we're not going to have Labour going against the will of the British people. What we will see, however, is Labour working hopefully with the SNP, hopefully with the Lib Dems, and hopefully with moderate Tories, of which Mr. Tannock certainly is one, although he's unfortunately not in the Commons. But moderate Tories who believe in soft Brexit, working together to water down this Brexit bill to ensure that Britain remains connected to Europe in some way.
All right, before I go to Charles Tannock, let's listen to what the head of the opposition Labour Party said. Jeremy Corbyn wants a bill that gives Britain continued access to Europe's single market.
We're going to hold them to account. We're going to hold them to account to protect jobs. We're going to hold them to account to make sure British industry does have market access, and we're not going to allow ourselves to become some kind of offshore tax haven. That's not what people voted for.
Charles Tannock, do you support that?
Well, of course, I don't think there's any mandate whatsoever to vote for impoverishment of the United Kingdom. There's very little mandate for the hardest Brexit, which sadly is the trajectory that we are now on. But I wanted to make a wider point that I noticed that Evan represents the Labour Party in Paris. My mother and stepfather both live in Paris. They are as British as is possible. They were born in Britain. They are British citizens. They had no vote. So every time I hear the word "the British people have spoken," I like to remind people that 1 million or so British citizens living in the European Union, whose rights will now be taken away as a result of Brexit, had no vote at all because they've been out of the country for more than 15 years. And yet, bizarrely, a citizen of Rwanda, French-speaking, living in London, would have had a vote in the EU referendum. It's a very strange franchise that we had. The result was very narrow. My wife, not British citizen, EU citizen, had no vote. It was a narrow majority, and I just don't see where the mandate is for a radical, hardline Brexit detaching Britain entirely from all its connections, economic and foreign policy and security and all the others from the continent of Europe. I think this is the wrong path. I want a soft Brexit. I'm disappointed we're not going to get that now.
So when you hear Jeremy
Europeans,
Corbyn talking about having a white paper, you know, rules that are set down the whole time that the negotiation process is going on, so that the government sticks to an agreed plan, do you agree with that, Charles Tannock?
I certainly believe that the government needs to be held to account. I have a lot of time for Theresa May, and she is the Prime Minister and leader of my party. But there hasn't been a general election, and there is no clear mandate for the hard Brexit, which is the policies which Theresa May is now pursuing. She has decided that's the course of action for the country. I am opposed to that. There will be other pro-European Conservatives opposed to it. There will be Peers, there will be Labour, there will be SNP. And I think that the government needs to be held to account, because one of the promises that we had, particularly at the time of the Nissan deal, is that the British economy would get the best deal. There would not be a negative impact on British prosperity. If we now see the hard Brexit, in which we are Brexiting into a vacuum, into the WTO schedules, if we can take them with us, which will be, I think, very, very damaging to the British economy, including the City of London, which I represent, as jobs start to flow back to Paris, to Frankfurt, to Dublin, maybe to New York. Maybe President Trump is very happy about that. Some of the American banks may relocate back to Wall Street. These are things that I couldn't possibly take without criticising, and I think it's right that the House of Commons and the House of Lords have their say. Maybe there should have been a white paper. I think it's bizarre in a way that the main keynote speech made by Theresa May was in Lancaster House. It wasn't even made before the House of Commons. There seems to be an attempt to stifle debate on this key constitutional matter of exiting the European Union.
And just, Charles, very briefly, because we have to go to the break.
Electorate.
Just very briefly, should there be a snap election?
No, I think it's clear that Theresa May has ruled that out, and it's very, very difficult because we have a fixed-term parliament to overcome the rigours of the Act which determines that. I think it'd be very difficult to do that. But I personally do believe that at the end of the 2-year period, if the deal looks extremely damaging and negative, it wouldn't be unreasonable to have another referendum to get the endorsement of the British people.
Right.
And on this occasion, I mean the British people. I'd like all British citizens to vote, including my mother, who lives in Paris.
All right, we'll pick up on these points when we come back with our panel. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.